Hey everybody, P.A. Turner, executive producer and host of your Break It Down show with a fantastic episode for you all today. Our guest is return guest Brian Dolan, who is the CEO of Verdant AI. You can always find out about Verdant at verdant.ai. Verdant AI. And if that's true, then what must be happening is Sandra and I are together doing a show, because Sandra always brings great guests from the tech world, and I love talking about blue tech, oceans, that kind of thing. We talk about it quite a bit. And actually, funny note, you're going to hear early on in this episode. Now, look, if you've watched or been on Zoom calls or any of these kind of things, you've seen the person's cat or their kid, or someone's hammering in the background, the dog. All those things have happened. Well, this one, the seals at the Oceanside Harbor. I recorded from my friend's boat. The seals show up and they're like, "Rrr, rrr, rrr." You're going to hear that. So for the first time ever, seals breaking in on a show, and I think you guys will dig it. And in this case, I mean actual animal seals, not my friends, the Navy SEALs. Okay, so that's kind of fun. You guys will dig it. We talk about a couple of things. Election controls using AI. I'm a firm believer that we can close the loop so that when you vote, not only do you know your vote is counted, but you can validate that it was counted properly. I mean, let's just take some trust out of this system. And this is not a political statement. It's just that, hey, if our votes truly matter, we should act like it, and we should find ways to lock it down. So we sort of have that conversation. And also we talk about a company called Floodlight Investments. And what Floodlight looks at is helping you see where your money is going in your investment account. So let's say you're a person who wants to invest in environmentally conscious things. This is just an example. There's a lot of them. You can take a look at your portfolio and say, look, I want ROI that, yeah, of course it's financial, but also I want to have a better planet for my grandkids. I want to spend money on companies that are trying to make the world a more balanced, safe, controlled place in terms of energy consumption, whatever it's going to be. And Floodlight is a company that's accelerated by Verdant, and so we talk about that quite a bit. These are the kind of technologies that are coming forward that are not obvious in your face, like, oh, we've invented a better light bulb. This is the ability to track where you're at and let you make better decisions. So there's a whole world of these newer things, these software solutions that I think are really fascinating, and you guys will dig them. Okay, a couple other things to talk about real quick. Save the Brave, savethebrave.org. You can always go to that donate tab. It is the giving season. This is the time of year when people give more money than any other. So one, if you're going to give, you can't decide what to give charity. Charity on Top. Go to charityonTop.org, buy a charity gift card, give it to the person that you care about. Don't even have to give them a gift card. It can just be an email. And you can say, hey, I gave you $50 of charity. Use it on wherever you want. And then give it to charity. Give it to your Charity on Top card. Give it to Save the Brave. And I'm telling you right now, and this is 100% true, if you haven't, check out our Charity on Top shows. When you get it through Charity on Top, you as the giver can say, I want all the processing fees put on me. So $50, $52.32, or whatever that number is, you can cover that. So when that company gets it, they don't have to do a thing. The money just drops straight into their account, and it just shows up. Bing! No effort, no work, no going to the bank. It's just done. So really, really cool. If you're going to give, Save the Brave or Charity on Top or both. Okay, one more thing to say to you is thank you all so much. October has been our biggest month to date. I can't say enough great things. So many people that I know have been talking about the show. Thank you. Hit me up on email. Hit me up on my text if you know me well enough to have my phone number. And just let me know what you think, or just whatever you want to talk about. I want to hear what you have to say. I want to hear who you want to hear on the show. We'll go out and get them. Okay, one more real quick thing to say to you. Here comes Brian Dolan.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hi, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Hi, this is Brian Dolan, and you're watching The Break It Down Show.
And now, The Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
How sweet is this? I'm in the Oceanside Harbor on the back of a boat. I'll show everybody.
That's pretty cool.
It's pretty sweet. Live on location. And then you're in Southern California as well. And then we have Sandra checking in.
Hello. I'm checking in from Tulum. If you want to see some jungle, I can show you guys. Yeah, let's see here.
What country are you in?
I'm in Mexico.
Mexico?
Yeah.
That's lovely.
So much fun.
It's not bad. It's not bad. I have no complaints.
I think this is the first time we've recorded with someone in Mexico. So
oh,
that's
yeah? Oh,
sweet
good.
too.
Well, we'll have to do more. I might be here a while.
Yeah. So we had Brian on before, and we talked about systems and how to fix problems that are big, hard problems, social problems where your intentions and your outcomes don't often align because there's so many variables. And I thought we might come back and just continue the greater conversation about this, because these problems that we try to deal with, they don't get easier. They're just getting harder. And I think since the last time we talked, there's been maybe even more unrest and more social problems. So I guess let's just try to dig in and let's pick up and let's go in a direction and see what we think.
Yeah, I think that the idea of actions and intentions not aligning is not new, right? And it's not particular to this time. Society's struggled with that forever. We're a little giddy today at Verdant because of a release we just did that actually comes right in alignment with that. And that one of our portfolio companies called Floodlight Invest just did a big release today, and they just doubled their number of users in the last 6 hours, and they're going like gangbusters. And the reason I say about the alignment is what they do is they offer people clarity on when they're investing in a company, where does the company donate their money to? Do they donate to conservative or Republican causes, or liberal or democratic causes? But more importantly to us personally, do they donate to environmental causes, or do they participate or have EPA violations? So if I'm a wealthy person investing in fossil fuels, am I aware that I'm investing in fossil fuels? When I go to my wealth manager and say, put me in the S&P 500, and then you realize that the S&P 500 has a lot of fossil fuel investments. So that's just one place. What's exciting is people can see what they're actually investing in, and Floodlight provides that. So that's fresh in my mind because it just happened this morning. And I think that the notion of like, am I doing what I want to be doing in this world? Am I using my money in the way I want to be using my money? Am I doing any other actions? Am I using my vote? Am I using my day-to-day routine in a way that aligns with my goals? I'm always fascinated by that topic. And like I said, pretty happy to be able to share this information about Floodlight this morning. There's lots more that's going on that I'd love to talk about.
Yeah, tell us a little more about Floodlight specifically. I understand the concept, but tell us more.
Yeah, so the basic idea is that they are for wealth managers, and they're for people who are investing lots of money. And typically what happens is if you go to, a Wells Fargo wealth manager or some large institution, that's me, Brian Dolan, by the way. Oh, I guess it's this way. You go to a large institution, and they say, we're going to put you in the S&P 500, and that will be your retirement fund. You say, okay, invest my money. I need something to retire, or I just want to grow my wealth. You don't know where that money's going. You don't know if the S&P 500, for instance, has a bunch of companies that are donating to causes that you don't believe in. A really good example is the one that they've been publicizing lately is Nike has a very pro-Black Lives Matter sort of message. However, their actual contributions to political efforts go to conservative efforts, which tend to be anti-Black Lives Matter. And so I think people want to be aware that when they're giving their money to these institutions or by investing in them, that's how the money is getting funneled.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, one of the things that Floodlight does, which I've learned about, is the way that it really unravels all of this information, which is publicly available. It's being published by the EPA, all of these environmental infractions, but they're coded in such a way that it makes it really difficult to understand the company behind these infractions. So a lot of these large companies have this large web of subsidiaries that it's really difficult to tie back to the corporate entity. And what Floodlight does is it really, brings light to, the truth behind what's really happening with these subsidiaries. And another example is Disney, for example. Walt Disney, they actually have quite a number of environmental infractions that they've had on a regular basis year over year. But you wouldn't know that, given their corporate reputation. So I think that just shining a light on the truth behind what these corporations are doing is really exciting to see from a transparency perspective, and really being able to put your money where your values are.
How valuable is it to put your money where your values are? In terms of retirement accounts, that kind of thing.
Well, it depends on how you measure value, right? If you measure value in material wealth, then maybe not at all. If it's just dollars for you, and there's plenty of people out there who think that, I put $1 in, I want $1.50 out. That's how they want to live their lives. That's fine. Who are we to judge on their sort of moral direction? But increasingly in society, we are seeing the consequences of sort of irresponsibly throwing our time, effort, and money into things. You find out again and again that even when you take it from the very, very small, like I like to talk about in the small and in the large, in the very, very small, an unkind action can taint somebody's day, right? All throughout the entire day, which you didn't really intend, but you were sort of careless when you were rude when you walked past them or something. And that's in the very small. In the very large, if you're investing in things that are contrary to your values, maybe you won't see it in your returns, but maybe your grandchildren will be affected by it, right? So you need to think, people are beginning to be more careful about how they think about how they're using their money, what influence they have in the world. Money is one of the best ways to influence people and companies. So how valuable is it? To me, personally, it's extremely valuable. It's extremely valuable. I'm very careful where I put my money. As an investor, I'm very careful where I put my money. To others, it might not be valuable at all. So I think it's a spectrum.
Well, I mean, I do think that there is ROI in it. I mean, it's sort of been signaled. The trend really started. I mean, it has been going, but BlackRock, one of the biggest investment management companies in the world, earlier this year, their CEO and chairman put out a note to their board of directors and their investors saying that they were going to be divesting of fossil fuels. So fossil fuels are really on a downward trend in terms of ROI, and big money managers, institutional money managers are seeing that, and they're making the shift. So it really does pay to put your money in a place where your values are. And I think that also the returns on ESGs lately have been showing that, right, Brian?
Yeah, they definitely have it. I'm hoping that those are sealed.
Oh my gosh!
How great is that?
That is great. That is great. So if you're watching this, you care about seals, you want to care about where you put your money, right? That's pretty great. That's the best way. I've seen dogs, cats, children, everything interrupt these videos. Seals. First time.
Yeah, that's awesome. And some people in some pedal kayaks. Let me ask another question then as we explore this, because putting your money where it's important, and just yesterday we had on a guy named Terrence Long. Sandra, maybe you know him. I met him through Jeremy. And what he does, he attacks the unexploded weapons in the ocean dumping program. And basically, there is no political will to deal with this. So the military establishments around the world have an agreement, and basically anything predating a certain date, let's say 1970, that's already in the water, essentially doesn't exist. And as long as they comply with the going forward rules, which allow dumping of weapons into the ocean or rivers, then you're okay. And so you're trying to deal with these long-term problems. He's like, plastic is nothing. We've got mustard gas in the ocean, and it's killing fish. And there's areas where all the fish have cancer, and it's become a genetic modification where they just come with cancer. It's these enormously problematic problems. Yeah, and he's struggling to get enough money and attention to do anything about the problem. But maybe it is smart to invest in Nike because they do make money. And so you can, although they employ Indonesians for pennies, but maybe you take some of that money and cleave it off and donate some to his NGO as part of the program. Is that possible to do something like that, where you're like, I want to be part black in my risk, but also part green in my return, so that I can divest and send things to these folks that are doing impossible work, like trying to get the hundreds of millions of, the tonnage of these weapons. Shocking.
I would very much like to hear more about those weapons. And I mean, one of the things, and I want to answer your other point about, using your money in your own personal directions. But one of the things that Sandra and I have spent a lot of time talking about is how do you come up with economies that are environmentally sustainable? And one of the problems that's been true for a long time is that the only way to make money in green economy for decades was government grants, which is just not sustainable, right? You can't really build a business around government grants. I mean, you can, but you can't, right? It's two sides of it, depending on whether or not you're a large contractor. So we've been looking around for ways to find green, sustainable economies, and they're coming. There's more and more of them all the time. And to Sandra's point a moment ago, Floodlight is pointing to the fact that the fossil fuels are beginning to decay. There was a great article, I'm trying to remember who wrote it, about that says that in 2017 will be seen as the year that fossil fuels collapse, and they're beginning to decay and decay and decay. So if you're not paying attention to where your money's going and it's all in fossil fuels, you're probably going to be in a bad place. And that's because of the change in tide and change in culture as people become more responsible with how they want to invest, partially. And also, frankly, the economy is better there. You get more jobs out of clean energy. You get more sustainable growth out of clean energy. It's a way to actually bring U.S. citizens back to work, re-employ them, because all those jobs are actually happening in the United States, or many of them are actually happening in the United States. So I think that on those, the actual return is getting really good in the green economy. We're always looking for things. How do we turn this de-weaponization of the seafloor into an economic driver so that we can get some attention and money on that? I don't know, but it's definitely one of those things that, I'm going to be thinking about over coffee, and hopefully somebody has a great idea they can pitch me at some point. I would love to hear more about that. And I also, not to go on too long, but like the notion of, I'm going to take my money from Nike and then I'm going to invest it in something, that is an atomic transaction level way of thinking about the world, which again is a point of view that a lot of people inhabit. I try to think in terms of systems. I try to think in terms of my net effect. So, the phrase, robbing from Peter to pay Paul, or the other way around, I honestly don't recall the specific phrase.
Yeah.
Or really
get your hands out of my pockets.
Exactly. Yeah, there we go. Do we really want to live in a world where I'm trying to offset some evil I just did? Or do you just want to live in a world where you're comfortable with all of your actions? You're not trying to offset some of them. You're constantly making a correct moral decision from your own point of view.
Yeah, Brian, you talked a little bit about how, you looking to find a monetization model for something like the munitions in the sea, but can you talk a little bit about what Verdant actually does and how you help bring these businesses to light?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'll talk about Verdant all day. I try to avoid it because I think people get sick of hearing about all the cool stuff we're doing, but I really do. So one thing, we have this company called Biomass One that is dedicated to employing farmers. I think, Pete, you and I may have discussed them. And the idea is farmers have a bunch of agricultural waste that actually can be used for energy feedstock. So you can take a bunch of stuff you normally throw away on a farm and sell it to an energy processing plant and turn it into electricity. So corn husks can be turned into electricity. Soybean shells, walnut shells, all these things can be turned into electricity. And even non-food waste can be turned into cow manure can be turned into electricity. But how do they do that? Well, there's no logistics support for all that. So we have a company now called Biomass One that's setting up some fairly large interactions with some of the major energy companies to help them become cleaner. So we are dealing with some of the big names in energy, and we're saying, hey, listen, you guys have a terrible reputation and your fossil fuels are going away. We're going to sell you cleaner energy sources. And so that's one where we found an economy where we can actually create business around green energy. That one's really exciting. That one's launching. Well, we were hoping to launch this month, but probably November, that'll be publicly available. So people can create these transactions where they can create cleaner energy from biomass and agricultural waste.
Right. How does Verdant help in those ventures?
Well, as we're investors, we invest in these companies. We typically invest expertise. Our big value add is that we can come in. We know how to build enterprise scale artificial intelligence solutions. That's a big part of what we do is we build AI. And we're using those skills in order to get these companies further along. We'll come in, we'll spend 3 to 6 months working with these companies, develop their product with them and for them, help them get to market, help them get their marketing done, and connect them with investors who will actually put in direct cash, whereas we put in effort and activity. We like to operate the companies because we are experienced operators. Our people have been doing this stuff for like 25 years. So we have another one that's along the same lines of values. Sorry, go ahead. No, I see. I told you I'd talk all day about it.
I was going to say, my buddy DeVoe put a question up, and has there been any advancement on getting plastic out of the oceans? And I wanted to say something about this because Terrence was talking about it, and he's like, it's ridiculous to spend this much effort on plastic when you have, again, mustard gas, VX gas leaking out of the ocean, not to mention all of the heavy metals. And to put effort into plastic straws in a place that primarily bags its garbage, he sort of scoffed at that and said, "You guys are, you're missing the forest for the bombs," and was desperate to make the point that you think of all of the horrible things that go into munitions, and it's all been down there forever, and so it's not just decimating, but the shelf life of this stuff is 5,000 years, or the half-life is 5,000 years. So plastic for sure is a problem, and I'm not trying to minimize it, but even more so. And then these are the legal dumping of weapons. Like the pile is getting bigger, not smaller. And then there's the illegal dumping, or the accidental dumping of things. So that was sort of Terrence's point, was there's this gigantic problem that is getting worse. And I think he was, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think what he was saying is you can get rid of all the plastic in the ocean and it wouldn't matter because it's still full of poison. So.
I mean, honestly, I've been working in marine science for a long time, and this is the first I've heard of that particular problem. And that's, probably why there are no efforts being placed against it. People know that when they throw a straw on the ground, it ends up in the ocean, and they realize that they have a direct connection to this pollution. Right. And I'm with you. Like, we definitely need to pull the plastic out of the oceans, but given the magnitude that you described, there's something that might have a little more precedent there, or should be a higher priority. But how do you get that into a popular effort? And how does a citizen do it? Like, one of the things, these groups in San Francisco are getting grants to go scoop up plastic. They're getting grants and they're making money. Now, if I gave Pete a grant for $10 million, could you really go pull these munitions out? And what are you going to do with them? Like, that's really hard. That's definitely something to gnaw on. Like, how do you turn that into an economic instrument to remove those things, remove and neutralize, not just remove them, not just throw them in the backyard, where do you put them?
Abatement of the land, because if it's seeped into that ocean floor, that has to be done. He described at least 2 different robots, a surface robot that's looking, and then a going down and getting things robot, because you don't want to put a human down there. And so, it's got to be it's a multinational effort, and it's tough to just grant. And the last thing you want is to give a grant and be like, we found these bombs. Where do we put them?
Can you put them somewhere for us? See how organic solutions, like, we've been learning that you can use algae and bacteria to decompose quite a few of these things that were seemingly undecomposable. So that, I'd be interested to see how that goes. And I think that perhaps that's one path. If you can find a bacteria or something, or an algae that can manage this waste, it probably has other commercial uses as well, right? It's not going to be the only thing it does. So that would be an interesting place to look if you're the producer of that's genetically modified algae. Of course, now people freak out when you say genetically modified, but if you're the producer of that, you might have a business model, how we're going to go and clean that up.
There's also a lot of energy in these weapons, and it doesn't convert one for one, but you look at that blast in Beirut and you see all that energy that went out from that. If you're able to and there's ways to, apparently in the bomb world, there's ways to capture that in a way that makes sense, because the default way they approach this stuff is to drop another bomb on top of the bombs and just use that as an accelerator to blow them all up, which is not the answer in the ocean. It turns out that stuff stays there. It's not in that capsulized form anymore, but now it's everywhere,
Yeah. Well, Pete, you've got to be closest to being in the bomb world out of the 3 of us. So.
I once flew on an airplane full of bombs, like hundreds and hundreds of bombs. It was intense.
Oh, wow.
For sure. Yeah. I wanted to, let's change gears a little bit, because the investing and the social responsibility of stuff, I mean, that, I think we've covered that, and I'm glad to cover it some more. We can go back, but I'm interested in your thoughts on, I'm a big proponent on locking down election security. And this is something where I think blockchain is important, because look, and this is not a political statement. I'm not trying to say mail-in ballots or whatever. What I'm saying is, when you vote, even in person, you walk in, you check your boxes, you walk out, and you trust that the system is there to count. But we know for a fact that when President Bush and Vice President Gore ran in Florida, they started devalidating ballots because they had counted them so many times. They, like, this is no longer, so you don't know that your vote ever counts, right? And so that's just that thing where you don't have this loop to close and say, for sure, here's what you voted for, and you have a record of it. You just hope that some person counts it correctly and it doesn't get lost or stepped on or anything. And just the fact that you have a person who makes a given amount of money handling ballots, whether they make no money as a volunteer or they work for the Postal Service or whatever it is, as a spy, that's exploitable. And if you give me enough money, I can exploit that system to whoever's benefit. So what do we do to lock this down and make it more of a closed loop, while still allowing access, of course? But how do we lock something like that down? It seems like we have the technology for that.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that. And one of the things, I think a lot of people turn to blockchain and they say, hey, blockchain is the answer. And I admit, I was like, hey, that seems like a good solution. I know a bit about blockchain and I've done some blockchain companies. Until I started reading up on a couple of the exploits in blockchain and following a professor on the West Coast somewhere in DC named Matt Blaze, who thinks a lot about this, about election security, and is a blockchain expert. And the thing that's exploitable in blockchain is what they call a majority attack. This is one of the attacks you can do. So blockchain, the reason people think it's not exploitable is because it takes a majority vote. So everybody does work and somebody says, is the work correct? And then there's a vote. And if you get 51% of the vote, they enter that transaction into the database. Well, that only works if you don't control 51% of the voters. So for instance, we've known that China has opened up a lot of machines to exploit cryptocurrency in this way. So they'll have a whole bunch of machines who are voting on the blockchain, and they can establish a majority vote. So all of a sudden, some of these currencies are getting a majority vote from a block, forgive the pun, where they have 10,000 machines who are voting yes, this transaction happened. The others are saying no, but because they have a majority, that gets entered. So you can exploit blockchain with money as well, simply by entering the chain. Now there are ways that that you can try to prevent that, but I don't know of any that are 100%. I would say one of the things that strikes me about the sort of the people who are anti-paper ballot is the unit economics of it. So when you think about how much would it actually cost, what would I have to do to change a paper ballot? Well, I have to get physical copy of that, right? I have to get a copy of that ballot, or I have to create a physical copy, which means that to do one ballot, I don't know what the numbers are, but to fake one ballot, I would probably have to spend like $1 in physical resources and personal resources. Right. If all I have to do is hack an electronic system, I can spend like a millionth of a penny and change thousands of ballots, right? So like the unit economics around what it would cost to do fraud at the paper level versus fraud at the electronic level, I think those unit economics point us strongly towards, let's do paper ballots. It's a lot more preventable. Yeah. I don't claim deep expertise on that, but as a guy who does a lot of financial models and who knows a lot, who's done a lot with the blockchains, like that's my feeling on it. I don't think I'm alone in this sort of the viewpoint on the unit economics of it. But I completely understand why people, go turn to blockchain. That seems like a good idea. But if you get into the details, maybe it's not.
Yeah. 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 It's
technology isn't always the right answer.
Don't say that. I'm a technologist.
Yeah.
Sometimes, the combination of, some of these, for example, on the ecological front or biological front, the combination of the AI plus, biosynthetics and, being able to, find some of these cures through, looking at different DNA is quite interesting, what AI can do in these different fields. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, Brian, your expertise there.
Oh, well, yeah. In terms of the, when you're trying to do like drug discovery, you're trying to, what you're basically doing is searching the space. Like how many chemicals can you combine? What are the different combinations I can provide, and what do they do? So drug discovery is this massive, basically search routine. And I think that stuff is exciting because it forces us to think out of the box around like, what does it mean to know something, what knowledge is, and how do we perform those things? So I've seen there's some questions coming in on the bottom. But I think when we're looking at how you can compute that and how you can do that search, the amount of compute we're able to leverage at a non-state actor level. Sorry to use the term state actor. I'm probably just brought up terrible memories for you, Pete. But at a non-state actor level is pretty limited until we're getting to this, I think, a renaissance of high-performance computing that's getting popularized. So like people are going to be able to do high-performance computing, which used to be limited to like the National Weather Service and the NSA. You can do it at home now. And you can push a lot of electrons really, really fast. And I think that those things are great for trying to find new solutions to these problems. Like we were saying, drug discovery is one of those interesting ones. And here at Verdant, we've been looking a lot at the high performance computing stuff and combining that with graph theory and graph analytics, because the graphs are a natural way to express these things, especially when you're dealing with very, very large matrices. But I don't want to get too technical, but we're excited by that ability to apply this AI in that place. We're talking to some pharma companies now. We don't have anything really moving on that front around doing the drug discovery. And it's all in alignment with like, where are we putting our time? We're putting our time into health. We're putting our time into environmental health, because I believe that environmental health is personal health. Where are we putting our investments? We're putting our investments in those same things. We just happen to have a skill set where we can leverage high performance computing, graph analytics, blockchain, all sorts of various families of AI in order to accomplish those sort of moral goals. And that's that's a luxury we get to enjoy because of our particular position.
When we think about the environment, we just had Bjorn Lomborg on the other day, and 15 years ago, he was a darling because he was looking at economics and how to make the best dollar for dollar choice. But now he's not, even though they're still doing Nobel grade work. The thought leadership has moved to things that he would suggest aren't as impactful as we want them to be. And as always, poor people, Bjorn Lomborg isn't saying there is no climate change. There is, he's not saying that the planet's not getting warmer. What he's saying is, if you spend your money on this and it's effective at, say, 25% less than you expect, then you've got a real expensive problem that you could be attacking by approaching other means, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So how do you look at these things, Brian? Like you talked about voting in terms of dollars and cents, and what, if you're going to pay for exploitation, it's a lot easier to go exploit blockchain, in our scenario. But what do we do when the narrative is moving around enough that he's making fair points, but there's also a lot of technology advancement in battery tech and algae tech and I don't know what a big matrix is. I kind of stop at when it gets to K and like 12, and then I'm like, that's too big for me. So help me understand.
All my examples are 3x3 anyway, so I like to joke. I build a 3x3 matrix, and then I think of very large values of 3. So that's the best way to sort of figure it out. With the election security, of course, is super interesting. And a number of years ago, and the data thereof, a number of years ago, back in like 2004, 2005, California had an election that seemed a little bit fishy, and I was approached by a nonprofit to do an analysis of the election results. And so that was a fun analysis to do. But one of the things I looked into was like sort of you want to figure out how much did the result actually deviate from the expected value, right? So if I expect 50 results for that candidate and I get 2,000 results for that candidate, that's a smell. If I get 56 results for that candidate, that's not a smell. Right. And so, so much of it is still kind of, you have to have that domain knowledge. But I do think that there's a lot of value in exploiting the poll data to understand what the parameters should be, right? Like one of the things people are still freaked out about 2016 is it was a big surprise because nobody really looked into the Electoral College. But if you had looked at the Electoral College as 538 did, Nate Silver looked at it and said, the Electoral College doesn't look that great for Clinton. But he put up, high numbers for Clinton. And I think people now think that Nate Silver doesn't know what he's talking about, when in fact, he was the most accurate predictor at the time because he looks at those poll numbers. So if we get results back post facto that say that this, that there's a smell here, that's one thing we can do, but unfortunately that's after the fact, right?
Right.
How do you do it in advance? I haven't heard a solution that I like yet. There's all sorts of ways you can sort of use computer vision to make sure people are voting, but then you're invading their privacy. Is it possible to use secured electronic votes that doesn't really rely on blockchain, but is uniquely identified to you, maybe even through biometrics? Probably doable. Extremely expensive, right? Like if I use my retina to vote, first of all, I'm invading your privacy. But secondly, that device is not going to be, a 2-cent device. And I have to ship one to everybody in America. That gets pretty complicated. I haven't really heard one that I'm super confident in. I think, in my opinion, paper ballots are probably the most robust. They're definitely not flawless. There's nothing that's flawless, but paper ballots seem the most robust to me at the moment.
And what about the thought process on dollars towards the environmental problem and where to best allocate them?
Yeah, so this is, your friend, I think he said his name was Terry, talking about the munitions at the bottom of the ocean. I have no idea how to turn that into an economic. So I would not put my money there yet, right?
Yeah.
It really, when you think about an economy like an ecological system, like we learn to hunt because we need to eat, right? And we learn to spend, and the spending makes our world go round, so to speak. Like I'm a total capitalist. I'm a capitalist with boundaries. I believe in good taxation structures and stuff like that, but I'm a total capitalist, and things are only sustainable if there's a real need there. And there's now, the need has to be economic and has to create these economic values. So when we're looking at opportunities and we're looking at value, there's plenty of things out there that are high return, economically high return, that are not obvious. For instance, I think agricultural waste is one of those things where people look at a pile of cow shit and don't think money.
No, we don't.
In fact, they don't. That's why they use the term, right? So when I was approached by Wendy to say, hey, you can turn this excrement, I'm trying not to swear on your show too much, you can turn this excrement into cash. I was like, well, that's pretty interesting. And that's beginning to be market viable. Another one is, we're dealing with a company that is placing addicted patients into rehab facilities. And called Recoverwell, and is their CEO. You
might want to say that again, Brian, because there was an airplane that.
No, I'm just going to say I'm about to jump out of the plane. So Amy Gray is the CEO of Recoverwell, and what they're doing is they're placing recovering addicts with rehab centers. And, it's a fact in this country that like 50% of the rehab beds go unused. It's a $42 billion industry, which means you're probably leaving $20 billion on the table. And the reason they go unused is because they can't connect with the patients. So Amy has found this very, very clever way to connect patients to rehabs and get them into those beds and get them the help they need at like the worst time in their life, the very worst time in their life. They've just come out of the emergency room. Well, maybe when they went in was the worst time, but they've just come out of the emergency room. They got to get help. They're in a bad place, and there's no way for them to get to it. No good way to get to a rehab. But there's an economic there. These people are trying to provide recovery services, right? So there's billions of dollars being spent, and there's tons of waste. So we can look at that as Verdant, and we go, okay, well, that is a place where it aligns with our values for sure. It's personal health. We very much enjoy, very much admire that. And there's an economic there that is sustainable because the recovery industry is growing by leaps and bounds, especially with the pandemic, right? Yeah. It's just terrible what's happening in the recovery and addiction space. And can you throw a government program at that? Yes, you can. Should we? I think we probably should. But a longer term solution is to create a market that actually heals people. And if we can create all these markets that heals people and heals the environment, that's the best way to go. So in terms of these big things, where do we do these huge spends? And my feeling is, I don't know a lot of these $1 billion spends. I haven't seen very many of those, but I found a lot of $100 million spends, right? And or $500 million spends. I think when you're talking about climate change, you're talking about multi-trillion dollar spends. That is not a market force, right? That's like at a government level. But we can get there with $1 billion here, a little bit of billion, a couple billion here, a couple billion there. Pretty soon it's real money, right?
One of the things that Bjorn talks about is because people who don't have wealth, they struggle for access to energy. And so they do things like burn cow poop in their house, which not only is bad for the environment, but also bad for your lungs and your well-being and health. And this is sort of a greater point, like, let's spend this money in places where we're creating more access to energy. If we are going to lose pieces of islands, let's look at what the Dutch have done to deal with that, but also let's ensure that people who don't have money to move have the ability to move higher land or go somewhere else as we try to sort these things out. But the problem breaks down in that we can't even have the conversation. Again, he went from being a top 100 influencer in the marketplace to being someone that bounces around country to country as he tries to solve this impossible problem. How do we account for the fluctuations in our fickleness as as a people?
Hey, this is Pete A. Turner from Lions Rock Productions. We create podcasts around here, and if you, your brand, or your company want to figure out how to do a podcast, just talk to me. I'll give you the advice on the right gear, the best plan, and show you how to take a podcast that makes sense for you, that's sustainable, that's scalable, and fun. Hit me up at pete@breakitdownshow.com. Let me help. I want to hear about it.
How do we account for the fluctuations in our fickleness, as a people?
Well, I definitely have some thoughts on that. And the thing I would hasten to point out is that from a perspective of distribution of wealth, distribution of energy, and quality of life, the world is getting better for most people, right? For the majority of people, the world is getting better. There's still things, and I think that honestly, the fact that we're appalled by some of the conditions that people have to live in is a good thing, because 100 years ago, we didn't know about it. Now we know about it. Now we're working to change it. So when you look at people who have to burn manure within their house and create lung disease, and you're looking to change that. This is the first time in history we can really sort of have that insight and make steps towards fixing it. So the world is getting better. So how do you account for these fluctuations? I don't think you do. But on the whole, en masse, statistically, as a group, things are improving a little bit at a time, and little bits of technology come out that suddenly make a huge difference in people's lives. And I think we're always struggling. And here in LA, there's a whole bunch of bioscience incubators that are looking for things like how do you capture more energy from gases or waste? How do you do forest greening or a desert greening, which is something that's really fascinating to me. Like, how do you turn a desert area back into arable land so that you can actually grow crops on it? There was this great experiment done in Lebanon in Jordan, around using an intermix of crops and some shade crops. And so they took this land that was completely barren and turned into a nice lush garden. They were growing vegetables. They were able to raise animals. And that is partially technology driven and partially just smart, husbandry of the land and of the animals. So the fact that we think in those ways, the fact that we're looking at places like Jordan and going, can we improve this? We're looking at Africa and go, can we improve this? I think it's a step forward. We're horrified by what we see there, but at least we're able to be horrified and move forward rather than just not know.
Yeah, I know from my time in Iraq, we were talking about greenhouses, and the guy explained that concept to me. He's like, I want you to look at my farm plot here. I've got dates up high, and I've got apple trees and fruit trees. And then below that, I have a ground crop. And if I wanted, I could also, make this quadrant fallow and just throw fish in there and have that be a fish pond and harvest whatever kind of fish it was. And that was a whole system. So you're right. Like, if you can take that ancient system and improve it by putting the right crop or, whatever it is, increasing yield, there's a lot of power in that.
Yeah, I'm very excited by that notion of being able to not only just use the natural methods, which are good, I like them, but I think that we as a species invent technology, and we're going to continue to do so. This physicist named David Deutsch talks about that quite a bit. Like, our value add to this planet is we can invent technology. We survive as a species because we are social and we can invent. So we should look for solutions that require inventions. If we can take that same shade crop analogy that you had and add some light touch technology to it, of which there's a lot out there. It's just not as sexy, but there's a lot of light touch technology, and make it sustainable. I think we should. I mean, we can do things now like grow copper wires within plants to harvest electricity that plants generate. And you can power like a watch with a large plant. Right, that's amazing stuff, and all of this is copper. Right, like, really, you could do that? Yes, sign me up. That's cool. So if we can start using those technologies, these low cost, very low touch technologies, until we get better at the high tech technologies, because a lot of high touch ones out there, but you never know if they're going to turn into killer wasps or something like that. You got to be careful with that part.
Yeah. having our bee farm also be our wind farm and use bee wind, and all of a sudden you get super Arnold Schwarzenegger bees because they're super fit. So Todd asked a question. One of the issues he's passionate about is water health, and I see the world's water supply diminishing. And I've been in parts of the world that they drink absolute filth. What solutions, AI solutions, have you seen to help clean the world's water supply? And then I want to add a secondary thing, because we often focus on clean water, but we also have to deal with wastewater once we provide a place for clean water.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this issue a lot, so I'm really glad for that question. Water health is super important to me, and I know it's to Sandra as well. Like that's like one of her driving passions.
Yes.
And ocean health, right?
Absolutely.
And one of the things that's been on my mind. Sorry, Sandra. Did you want to jump in?
No, please. Yeah, I mean, I can add to it, but please go ahead.
So one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is that all of our waste, our human waste, just kind of gets flushed, literally, right? And figuratively, but more important, literally. And we are not thinking of ourselves as contributing to our immediate environment with our own excrement. I know it sounds kind of gross, but we're part of an environment. We should be pushing back to our environment rather than pushing ourselves into that environment. And we have all this technology. We have thousands of years of civilization that says water moves through us once and then goes out into the ocean, right? We use it to water our crops and then it goes out into the ocean. We use it to flush our toilets, it goes out into the ocean. And it just gets captured once, as opposed to maintaining its role in the current ecosystem. So I think that there's a lot there that we can be exploring in terms of like composting toilets, capturing. I literally just read this statistic and I can't remember it, but the trillions of gallons of water that's wasted in the sewage system gets pushed out into the ocean in a major city, like trillions of gallons per year that could be used to go back into the water table if treated correctly, right? And we could definitely use some technology. There's definitely technology out there to filter this water. It's not cheap enough yet, but it will get cheaper as water becomes more important. In terms of the AI portion of that, AI is really the part where you make a decision about something. Like people want to use computer vision to identify, and they call that a lot of people consider computer vision AI to identify a broken part or something. So you can use vision to to see things in the water. Those are like visual impurities. There's also all sorts of sensor arrays that you can put in to sense what sort of nutrients and bacteria might be there. But the AI really comes in when you're making a decision about where to send that water or what to do with it next. So we've just recaptured, 1 million gallons from the sewer system. Where should it go now? So that planning is really where the AI part is going to probably contribute the most. It will be able to identify, deficits in parts of the system and send it over there. But I don't think that we're ready really for an AI problem or an AI solution yet until we have a more basic fundamental like procedural processing solution. But I'm happy to jump in there. If one jumps up, this is a passion of mine. I was, like I said, I was a marine ecologist when I was in grad school. So I would definitely like to see more of that happen. But I don't think that there's really an AI problem yet. If there is, please tell me about it.
I mean, I feel like maybe the AI could be used in terms of technology optimization. So, for example, being here down in Mexico, we really don't want to be drinking the water. And we actually just got this system that filters the water through, I believe it's just heating it up, the steam. And so all the impurities, fall down to the bottom. But something like that technology, looking at the different components to it and looking at AI to optimize it, to build it at scale, might be one of the ways that AI could be employed. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's a huge problem, and I think that the human manure. I was recently visiting a friend out in Grass Valley, and they're a totally sustainable system and off the grid, and they actually do use human manure to actually fertilize their crops and everything. So the solutions are out there. It's just a matter, I think, of the will and desire on our part to employ them.
We also would have to get over our fear of using reclaimed water, for consumption. And I always loved, and anybody's listening to this show, and I probably said it when we were on, but We literally poop into potable water, and there's nothing more decadent than that. Just it's just we pour chemicals into it to clean our toilet. Like this potable water is nothing. And literally, do not think about it the moment we push that handle. And it just goes away, and a magician does something with it.
Last time we spoke, you said that. I think that really stuck around in my subconscious, honestly, because I'm living in the Southwest of the United States where there's a lot of desert, and you think a lot about well, if I could just return the nutrients I'm absorbing back to my environment in some way, and that would be, we would have so many fewer problems.
That's why I pee in the backyard.
Yeah, I don't. If my wife was watching, I never do that.
Right now we've got a mold abatement thing going on in the house, and so we are allowed to pee in the backyard. And how great is that? I'm going to ask Kelly's question. Kelly does a lot of work in Haiti, and they need a lot of help. And during the Bjorn Lomborg episode, I brought up the fact that if you look at a aerial view of Hispaniola, the Haitian side is a desert, in effect, and then the other side, the Dominican Republic side, is forested. Neither of those countries is terribly wealthy, but Haiti is such a worse off place. So he says Haiti, more than 97% deforested for charcoal creation due to a lack of solutions for cooking energy. As a result, every year when hurricanes blow through, villages are devastated and people are literally swept away due to the deforestation. How can the private or nonprofit sector use tech to affect change in a place where there's government limitations? It's really easy to pay a lot of money to have no effect in Haiti.
Yeah, that's true in lots of the world, right? Like you can pay a lot of money and get, the first, I have some opinions on that, but there's a guy that I want to point to who has better opinions than I do. His name is Jim Chu. And he runs a community called The Nest, which is a group of angel investors and general VCs who invest in developing countries. And they do a thing every Thursday where they talk about new technologies coming through. Their focus has been a lot on Africa. That just seems to be where they're spending a lot of their time with the entrepreneurs. But they, at The Nest, frequently you see these sorts of plays come up. Like I have a cooking solution play. I don't remember a cooking solution specifically, but these sort of low energy and quality of life issues. So I'm happy to express my opinion, but also you should be looking into findthenest.org or findthenest.com, I think it's called. And they a lot about technology, people investing in technologies for developing countries. So that's, Kelly, if you're interested in that subject, please go over there. Tell Jim I said hi.
And Jim spent a lot of time in Haiti as well.
Yeah, he does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I think in terms of the you want to boil it down. And actually, Kelly, I think you've already started to boil it down. You sort of started with with the small, like cooking energy, and that leading to, a national problem in that case. And it really sort of an international, global problem ultimately. But so one of the things we want to be able to do is reduce that national problem to something that can be handled as sort of a smaller economic. So if there was some sort of solution where people had cooking energy, how much impact would it really have? And actually goes back to Pete's question. So let's say we solve the cooking energy problem. Does that solve deforestation? I don't know. I mean, I don't know the economics of that. But if it does, then hey, we have a way to get our teeth into this thing and start cutting away at it. I don't know of cooking energy solutions or just general gas. I do know that manure, like you said, is usually burned, and there are way more efficient ways to digest manure. These digesters that are getting cheaper and cheaper. A friend of mine at a company called Pensaco has an interesting digester. It's not cheap enough for developing countries yet, but they're getting cheaper and cheaper, and they're going to be able to produce clean natural gas, which is still burning, but it's burning more efficiently. From these digesters, and would be a lot better for these once they become economical. But how do we get those down to the unit price? Probably material science. So like we want to back all the way down to can we produce a metal that can contain this digester that will allow us to create the right the right bacteria that will digest this into an energy solution that we can use. So it has to get way down to the material science level or something like that. Those particular plays. But I would definitely be interested to know, and I think Jim might have an opinion on that. But my ultimate point was like, well, we kind of found the path. We know that if we can handle the cooking energy thing, we can actually start to address a national crisis. As opposed to just going, national crisis, what do? Plant a bunch of trees? It's not going to help. People are going to cut them down. So we can get it down to something that's actually actionable, which is important,
Yes. And then I guess I wanted to ask you, just as we close out our last little bit here, if you want to get into it, but we've been talking a little bit about charter schools and should the money follow the student? Or public schools have to take any kid, whether they are a knife-wielding kid that needs a lot of help. You can't kick that kid out of all the schools, right? So these multiple problems that link together. And to be fair, unions tend to create problems where the kid's education or an alternate system's ability to educate a kid is subordinate to what the union has set up. And that's not meant to be anti-union. It's just a fact that these things don't play well together. So what are your thoughts? Is there an AI solution to find, where that kid, and we're talking about the kid that can't just have access to education because they're in a crap school and, we just don't have enough, I guess, communal knowledge of that system to go, this 10% of kids need to go to this extra special school and they, that money needs to, I don't know, man, what do we do about this problem? Because we're letting, again, the poorest, the most needy kids down. And this is not a black problem. This is a poor people problem.
It's a poor people problem. Yeah, most racial problems really are poor or economic problems, right?
Right. Like there's not rich people getting shot by cops. Like that just doesn't happen.
Exactly. People, there are definitely racial problems in this country, but a lot of it really boils down to those who have the capital to stay out of trouble and those who don't. And stay out of trouble means like what environment imposes on them. Learning is an interesting thing. It's as an artificial intelligence guy, I spend a lot of time thinking about the intelligence part of that, less about the artificial part of that. And so I've done a lot of reading on learning theory. And one of the things that's exciting to me, I have two kids who are grade school kids, and they're both doing remote learning right now. And it's not going well. I mean, it's not going well for anybody. I don't know of anybody who is doing better with remote learning. But it has exposed the need to go back into learning theory. And some of the things that people were talking about is like, how do you teach? Like, what does teaching mean? And as you start to develop, and the way this is manifesting in my experience is people are building tools like, how do you teach geometry remotely if you don't have a chalkboard? And if you can't use like a compass and a ruler and a pencil? So you're now thinking about teaching geometry from a 21st century point of view. And one of the things we've learned in the 21st century about learning is that you have to have a question in your mind before you can learn anything. As I'm going to quote Claude Shannon and Norbert Wiener again, information is the resolution of uncertainty. And if you don't have information, if you don't have uncertainty, you don't get any information. So you have to create this like challenge in the brain in order for people to learn. So when we're building these 21st century tools around remote, teaching geometry remotely, we're thinking in terms of those. So like the pedagogy that I'm seeing in my son's geometry videos were made like in the last 3 to 4 years, way better than the pedagogy from 20 years ago, right? So like because they go, hey, here's a problem. How do we solve the problem? Make the student think about the problem, and then introduce the answer to them in logical steps. So I think that the theory of learning is advancing very, very rapidly in the time of COVID because people are realizing just what a catastrophe this is. And that's not the full solution, but definitely virtual solutions and learning theory are advancing right now. And I feel like in a couple of years, we're going to have a better answer for how we can treat those kids who have attention deficit disorder or, what other factors in their life that are preventing them from focusing on school. We're finding ways. We've learned through video games how to, capture somebody and keep somebody's attention. And that stuff is being turned. Actually, we have a startup in that, but it's very tangential. We're working with a guy at Cedars-Sinai who's using virtual reality to overcome stress, overcome anxiety, and addiction problems. So how do we capture the attention using video games and teach them? I think a lot of people are thinking about that. And so I'm optimistic that we'll have a better answer in a couple of years. But we've already made some progress.
Not be a conversation with Brian without a Norbert Wiener reference. But I think also to add to that, Brian, I mean, there are also, you know, a lot of new technologies that are being developed that are, you know, looking at personalized education and, you know, how programs and education can be tailored to, you know, particular learning habits or, you know, the individual really. So I think that's pretty exciting also.
We've come the last couple hundred years have been all about like, I'm going to tell you to do this and you will copy what I do, right? And we've learned that that's not effective. And this particular pandemic is exposing just how ineffective that is. And I think that's driving a lot of thought and new learnings. It's not like this big boom. It's never a big boom, right? Like even the internet wasn't a big boom. The internet seeped into our lives over 25 years. So I think people want to go like, where's the answer now? It's like, wow, we're kind of trickling towards it. I believe we're trickling towards it. And the world is getting better.
We had a guy on the show, his name's Aditya Nagrath, and he's got a company called Elephant Learning. And and right now they're starting with the lower grade kids because like we can teach your kid a year's worth of math in 3 months because they rebuild the foundation and platform. Yeah, and it's called Elephant Learning, and they're working to solve that problem. So, you know, and obviously Cam Lab, I don't know how you do that in your house safely, but you know, these things like math and geometry and, you know, the physical sciences, maybe you can do those things. But does that money then follow the student to the home and like we now pay the parent to have a classroom in their house? Or, you know, what do we do with that? Or does the federal government get out of the education business and we're just like, hey, that's not we're going to get rid of that entire budget line item and just let you guys figure that out with service providers?
Well, if you want to create more economic disparity in learning, then you can take the government out of it, right? Like as soon as it becomes a private thing, like there are very, very few industries that serve well across the entire economic strata. And I say very, very few because I can't think of any. So there's probably some out there. I don't know what they are, right? Like when you privatize something, you're basically telling poor people that they're out of luck. Right. And there's really no way around that. Like that's what capitalism is, right? Capitalism is the transfer of wealth from one place to another. And once you privatize it, you're just accelerating that. So I understand why people get frustrated with school districts and federal schools and state schools and city schools. Totally get it. There's a lot like the things you said at the top of this segment like about how you know, it's bureaucracy and they're not servicing. Totally agree. You pull them out of that and it's going to get way worse. And then we're going to go back to not even seeing it. Right? Because we don't see the people who don't get into the private schools. We don't see the people who don't get into the schools on our daily basis. When my son, who's in an accelerated program, is sitting in class, he's sitting in class with kids who need extra attention, and we see them, right? And we're aware of them, and we are moved to help them. But there's just the same thing. Like Haiti, we are moved to help them because we are aware. 100 years ago, we weren't aware. You know, 200 years ago, we weren't aware. So I'm very much a fan of having federal or state or government involvement for that, to keep the equality up and to keep the visibility up. Oh, yeah. And my daughter actually is doing a pretty cool home chemistry course. So, I saw somebody posted a thing.
I am not if the teacher said, don't put the stopper on tight, I'd jam that thing on as hard as I could. Don't get this too hot, all the way up. I was kind of an experiment. Good enough at science to be in the class, bad enough at the outcomes that anyhow. Hey, listen, we've done an hour, and I don't want to take any more of your guys' time. Awesome to record with you in Mexico, Sandra. I'm also staring at another sea lion over there. That's kind of neat. But I always love these. Let's do some more. Let's grab some of these wonderful minds we're talking about, and let's get them on the show to have these conversations, because the more we learn, the less we know. The more we know, like, we have to work hard to take these problems seriously. Because whether it's the ocean or education, it doesn't tolerate silver bullets and single answers or political ideology. These things are way too hard for that.
Yeah,
very well
100%.
said.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Pete. So fun to see you.
I know, so fun. And actually, we're almost neighbors. I'm less than a mile from the border, so Come
on down. We're waiting for you. There's a great escape happening right now. The great exodus to Mexico.
I love Mexico. You know my Spanish is strong. All right, I'm going to sign off here.